Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. And it's a real pleasure to introduce Jonathan Willet, who is a superb naturalist and well-known conservationist in the Highlands. And uh, Jonathan's been involved in nature conservation, environmental education, and nature tourism, and biological data management for almost 30 years. Most of that time has been spent working in the Highlands, and his favourite pastime is enjoying the manifest glories of nature. Though if pushed, he would say that all things odonata, that is, dragonflies and damselflies, are a particular interest, and he's very well known for that. And he's been working for the Cairngorms National Park Authority since March 2023. So it's my real pleasure to hand over to Jonathan Willet. So thanks, Jonathan.
That's great, Dan. Thank you very much. And thank you very much to the Scottish Wildlife Trust for inviting me along to give a talk all about beavers. So the talk today is really going to be looking at the project that we've gone through to bring beavers back. So a little bit about beavers in the past, a bit about why we have taken the decision as the National Park Authority to bring beavers back, and the process that we went through, a little bit about beaver ecology, and then at the end, hopefully some of you will have some questions, and I'll do my very best to go and answer that. So I'll just go and share my screen and we'll get the presentation started. Slideshow. So here we go. So the talk is entitled Bringing Beavers Back to the Park, and that is our official title of the project. It's started before I actually began. So it was in June 2022 that there was a board paper that went to the National Park Authority board, and it made a proposal that the park should be the authority, the organisation that took forward bringing beavers back. Now, this was precipitated by a change in the legislation at the end of 2021, which allowed beavers to be translocated outwith of range. And now that was a big change, because prior to that, you weren't allowed to move beavers outwith of the current range as they were expanding out of Tayside. So you weren't allowed to translocate any beavers beyond that point. But with the change in legislation, there was the first translocation took place at Argity Red Kites at Tom Bowser's place. And then you may have heard of that, but then also with a slightly higher profile one was in Loch Lomond on the RSPB Nature Reserve there. And again, that gained quite a bit of media interest. But those were both really in range, because beavers had been really quite close by in those areas. Whereas in the Cairngorms National Park, there hadn't been any beavers really for hundreds of years. And the Spey catchment, which was the one that we focused on, was one that had no beavers near it, really. So it was pretty much a clean slate in that respect. So we had to obviously go and get a license for that, and we had to do quite a lot to go and get that license. It was really quite an involved process, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. But most of you come here to see some nice pictures of beavers, I would imagine. And this is the rear view of a beaver. As you can see, they're surprisingly large animals. They're up to 1.2 meters long. That's almost 4 feet. They've got a broad, scaly tail, which is almost a unique feature. Obviously, the duckbill platypus has got something similar, but it's not quite as big. And they do leave trails that are really quite obvious. So their feeding signs that you may be familiar with are obviously quite obvious. But just because they're such a bulky animal, you can see this particular beaver in shot. It's been walking backwards and forwards along this path, and it's just created this depression in it just because of the weight and the size of it. So when they move through grassy areas or they move through soft sediments, they do form a very obvious trail really quite quickly. And they can weigh up to between 20 to 25 kilograms, sometimes even up to 30 or perhaps even a little bit more in some very large adults. So they are, a pretty big mammal, and they are the second largest rodent in the world, but they're the largest northern hemisphere rodent. So this is a little slide just looking at the probable post-ice age distribution of beavers in Eurasia. So when we talk about beavers, we talk about the Eurasian beaver, and we also talk about the North American beaver, or what used to be called the Canadian beaver. They are very, very similar species. So they look pretty much exactly the same. If you've got a good eye for beaver heads and beaver skulls, you can see there's a slight difference between the two. But overall, people always thought they were the same species. And it wasn't until 1970 they did some chromosomal analysis, and they found out that the chromosome number was different. So it was 48 chromosomes with the Eurasian beaver and 40 chromosomes with the North American beaver. So they've been separated evolutionarily by 7 million years, but they have co-evolved to be almost exactly the same and have an incredibly similar suite of behaviors. So the common ancestral beaver goes back 7 million years, but the beavers that we have nowadays, look pretty much exactly the same, and they behave in a very, very similar manner. Now, the distribution of beavers, when I saw this slide, first of all, I was really blown away because, beavers down to the Red Sea, which is absolutely incredible. They were in the Iraq marshes until a few hundred years ago. Just absolutely, actually, I better go and check that fact. But they were historically in the Iraq marshes. So it's not really somewhere you would think you would find beavers. You'd think it's going to be too hot for them, but obviously they did survive in the Tigris and Euphrates and all the wetlands round about there. They were also found in Greece. You might be able to see there's a couple of question marks there. No known fossils, very fragmented habitat. But it's quite possible that they could have been all the way down to the south of Italy, down towards the Algarve in Portugal, and suitable rivers that were there, and also in the southern parts of Greece. Because obviously the habitat that we see now is not necessarily the habitat that was there 2,000–3,000 years ago. So for example, in northern Italy and southern France, there was lions there until about 2,000 years ago. So things have changed quite markedly. In the British Isles, certainly within mainland Britain, we've got evidence of beavers, both fossils and pre-fossils. So there's a beaver-chewed piece of wood that was dated at 9,000 years old, which was in a peat bog in southern Scotland. So we have sort of young remains, effectively, of beaver activity, and quite possibly if we started digging through some of the sediments that we'd find beside some of our burns and our rivers, we probably would find maybe old beaver dams there or evidence of beaver activity. And this was first discovered in the southwest of England, a place called the Sweet Track. So some of you may be familiar with the area near Glastonbury, the west of Glastonbury, a huge mosaic of wet grassland and also wetland. It's now called the Avalon Marshes. It's a group of national nature reserves. And there's a prehistoric track there, dates about 5,000 years old, called the Sweet Track. And when they were excavating that, they found the platforms that people were sleeping on. And they investigated the pieces of wood, and they couldn't figure out what tool had been used to go and shape or cut the pieces of wood. And all the archaeologists sent it around each other, and no one was really sure. And they're thinking, my goodness, what tool is this? And then they sent it to a zoologist, and they said, well, that was beaver. And for one particular scientist who was involved in that, a lady called Brian Nichols, who became Professor Brian Nichols, it really ignited a huge interest in beavers and people and how the two interacted. And she dove very, very deep into that, went to Brittany where there were beavers and started taking dams apart to go and find out what they would actually look like if you came across a fossilized beaver dam that was only partially intact. And she really increased our knowledge massively on how early humans who've been in Western Europe for 400,000 years, how they would have interacted with beavers. So some of the things that she was coming up with was most likely coppicing. Beavers inspired us to go and perfect coppicing. Quite possibly, they inspired people to build dams. The first dams appeared about 3,000 years ago in Mesopotamia, so between the Tigris and Euphrates, where there was beavers. It's also been said that cranogs, so beaver lodges, inspired humans to go and create cranogs as well. So we do have quite a lot to thank beavers for. If we go over to the island of Ireland, we'll see that there's, again, 2 question marks there. There's no evidence of beavers there that we found yet, but there's no reason why beavers couldn't have got there. They can swim several miles over open water, open seawater, and that's how they will colonise some areas by going from catchment to catchment round the coast. And that's certainly what they do in Norway, and the expectation is that that's what they will do in Britain as well, as their numbers start to increase. So it's just to put the context there that beavers were pretty much everywhere in very, very large numbers. And I suppose the big question is, why aren't they in such large numbers now? And you go back to the early 1900s, there was, I think, about 6 extant beaver populations in the western part of Europe. So there's one in France, there was one in Norway, there was one in Germany, one in Belarusia, one in Russia, and I think there was one other one as well. It's either 5 or 6 extant populations. So all of the beavers that we have now came from those particular populations. And I'll talk more about the history of the beavers that we've got in Britain now a little bit later on. So why did they go extinct due to hunting? So I've put in the initials here, but because we've got so many people, it's going to be too difficult to get everybody's answers. But maybe just think to yourself, what's the first one? M, what could that mean? That's probably the most obvious one. It's meat. So beavers are a large animal. They maintain themselves in good condition. They don't go lean in the winter time, so they were much sought after as prey. So that was one of the first reasons why beaver were hunted, was because of the meat. And particularly in North America, the Native Americans there particularly valued beavers in the winter time because they were very fatty and all the other animals were very lean. And if you're going to metabolize protein, you do need a certain amount of fat to go with it. So beavers were really much sought after. And if you're interested in folklore at all, there's a massive amount of North American folklore about beavers. It's absolutely fascinating. Then the next one is C, which is not maybe the most obvious one, but that is castoreum. So castoreum is a substance that beavers exude from two, they look like a bit like deflated balloons, but 2 castor sacs, which are located very close to their cloaca, the opening underneath the tail. And that particular substance was much sought after initially as medicine. It was thought that there was all sorts of very positive things associated with castoreum, and also the castor sacs themselves, which was something to be ground up and taken as medicine. And there's some fairly bizarre stories as well about beavers and their castor sacs, but I won't go into that here. But they do, the castoreum, it contains over 100 different compounds. It's incredibly diverse in the compounds that it's got, and beavers have an incredibly well-developed sense of smell. So the castoreum is used to scent mark their territories, and another beaver sniffing the scent mound of another beaver gets a massive amount of information from that particular secretion. So the castoreum is very important for beavers, but people found it was useful as medicine because it does contain metabolites of willow, and of course willow contains salicylic acid. So there was a form of aspirin that was in the castoreum. It's also used for waterproofing of the fur of the beavers as well. So it's a bit like the preen gland that you would get in a bird. And the castoreum, again, was one of the reasons why they were hunted. But that didn't really lead them to extinction. It was more kind of a byproduct of the hunting for fur, which is incredibly soft. They got an amazing under fur, which has got, so round about the belly area, it's about 38,000 follicles per square centimetre, which is very, very dense fur. And the under fur, the wool is incredibly soft, incredibly warm. The outer layer with the longer guard hairs, which you can see in the picture here on the right-hand side, they protect the fur and help keep it waterproof. And then the wool underneath maintains an air layer, and so stops the beaver getting too cold when it's moving around in really cold water. And of course, mutual grooming is very important because it keeps the fur in really good condition, removes parasites as well, and also augments the pair bond. And in the hind feet of the beavers, which are these very large webbed feet, they've got two claws which are very close together, so-called split nail, and that's a natural comb that they use. And beavers are incredibly flexible. And when you see videos of them grooming, they can pretty much get just about all of their body, which is really quite remarkable. But those difficult bits those difficult bits to go and groom, another beaver is very handy to go and get to those particular bits. So meat, castoreum, and fur. But the last FFHF, that's what really led beavers to almost complete extinction. And this was fur for hat felting. So this under fur, this wool that we talk about, very fine, but also barbed, so it stays together very well. It doesn't get parted easily, holds the air. They found that if you process that, so if you rubbed it together with some chemicals, you would get an amazing felt that would make a great hat, which would really hold its shape for a very long time, last probably more than a lifetime, and much, much sought after. And really from the 15th century onwards, there was a huge amount of hunting of beavers, primarily for their pelts, for the hat industry. Initially, that was centered in Russia, and then somehow the British managed to get the techniques that the Russians weren't willing to share, and they came over to Britain in the 17th century. And from then on, Britain was an epicenter of hat making. So Napoleon's bicorn hat, that was made out of beaver felt. All of the hats in the British Army and Navy, they all would have made out of beaver felt. In Robert Burns's time, hats were known as beavers because of the eponymous fur. And then when they ran out of fur, or almost ran out of fur in Europe, then they moved to North America. And the Hudson Bay Company was created in the 1670s by Charles II, and its primary objective was to get as much fur as possible out of what turned into Canada. And one of the reasons that Canada is actually really to do with the beaver itself. Because two very large companies, the Northwestern Company and the Hudson Bay Company, were sort of competing with each other to make as much money as possible out of the fur of these wild creatures. And the North American beaver and the Eurasian beaver do both have the same fur with the same properties. So it keeps them warm underwater. So what is a beaver? So we've talked about it. It was hunted to extinction pretty much for its fur. But what is a beaver? Well, it's a big rodent. It's the second largest rodent in the world, largest one in the Northern Hemisphere. There's lots and lots of beaver names or beaver allusions in the British language. So we've got, if you're industrious, you're an eager beaver, or you're busy as a beaver. You're beavering away. And it's incredible that an animal that probably went extinct over 500 years ago in Britain still has a currency within our language. It's quite possible that's from North America, or just it was just a particularly kind of sticky sort of set of behaviours that people never really quite forgot it. It's also semi-aquatic, so it's not fully aquatic. It's not like a seal, doesn't spend all its life in water, but has lots of adaptations that allow it to spend quite a lot of time in water. So it's got this waterproof fur, it's got a large body size, so it doesn't lose too much weight. It's got valves in its ears and its nose, which allow it to shut them off when it goes underwater. It's got a nictitating membrane, which is basically a third eyelid, which acts as a pair of swimming goggles, so it closes over the eye, but still allows the beaver to go and see underwater. And when a beaver is floating on the top of the water, only the nose, eyes, and the ears are above the water, and the rest of the body is below. And so it makes them really quite difficult to see when they're static, and they do move very, very quietly through the water. Incredibly well adapted, very large hind paws with webbed feet, so 20 centimeters long. And if they've taken some video footage, some film footage of beavers underwater swimming, and you see they tuck their front paws in and they just use their hind feet to go and paddle away underwater. They will also use their tail as a rudder and also to give a little bit of extra propulsion when that is required. So lots of really interesting adaptations to living in the water. The 90% and 20 meters is lots of studies have shown that 90% of beavers' activity, around about that amount, is within 20 meters of the water course. They don't tend to like being very far away from water. And that's, if you go a couple of points down, that's because they're built for comfort and not speed. So a beaver going flat out is 4.5 miles an hour. A beaver swimming flat out is 4.5 miles an hour. So they don't really go anywhere quick. So they don't like being far away from water. They want to get to the water as quickly as possible. They like a sufficient depth of water they feel safe in, around about 70 centimeters. And they also can hold their breath for up to 15 minutes. So if they are on land, they think a predator's coming, they will go into the water, they'll maybe slap their tail before they dive to go and warn the other beavers that there's a threat about, and then they will go down to the depths of the water, and they will stay there for 15 minutes, or they will go and swim, and they can swim up to 1 kilometre underwater, holding their breath and swimming back towards where their lodge or where their burrow is. So sometimes beavers do travel greater distances, and usually that would be looking for food. If there's particularly tasty food that was more than 20 meters away, that might draw them there. But also young beavers, when they're dispersing, so sexually mature young beavers, they will sometimes travel quite large distances, particularly if mates are scarce. They will travel large distances to try and find another mate, because beavers don't really want to be single. They're always looking to find a territory and find a mate to go along with that. They're also a herbivore. We can thank C.S. Lewis for getting the beavers in his Chronicles of Narnia books to get the beavers to go and sit down at a table and eat some fish. It's amazing what an impact that particular book had, because sometimes that's the only thing people will know about beavers is they eat fish, because of all to do with what C.S. Lewis wrote. But they are a pure herbivore. They eat over 400 different species of plant they've been recorded as eating. In the wintertime, they primarily eat bark. So they tend to take down woody vegetation in the wintertime to go eat the bark, because that's still living and they can get nutrition out of that. But during the spring, summer, and into the autumn, they're feeding primarily on plants. So they don't take down quite so much woody material. Woody material, the taking of woody material accelerates round about September time. So when we get to the equinox, when it's obviously starts to get darker a lot quicker, and I'm sure you've noticed that in September it gets darker quite a lot quicker, that's a clue to the beavers to say, okay, winter's coming, you need to start taking trees down to go and make a food cache. Now, beavers in Tayside, if they're living near a carrot field or a potato field, they don't make a cache of food because they've got fields nearby that are full of food. So sometimes this behavior doesn't happen, but most of the time, outwith of areas with large amounts of agricultural produce that are available to them, beavers will make a cache of food. They're a cortivore, not a lignivore, so that's just a fancy way of saying they eat bark, but they don't eat wood. So the wood chips are a byproduct of the beavers taking trees down, but they can't digest the wood. They're not a fungus, can't digest the lignin, but they can digest the bark, which is, even in the middle of winter, still has nutrition. One of the reasons they're so big is they do need a lot of space for their digestive system. They're bulk feeders. They can take about 30% of the nutrition from the food that they ingest. And just like rabbits and hares, just think of the digestive system very similar to that. They will sometimes re-ingest some of the feces to go and get more of the nutrients out of them. So those will be soft, green droppings, and then they'll re-ingest them just like rabbits and hares do. And then the ones that are not going to ingest are sort of harder and darker. And beaver poo is very fibrous, and usually you don't tend to find any of it because beavers tend to go to the toilet in the water, and it's just a fibrous mass of plant material, and it just basically just dissolves and disappears and dissipates. And occasionally you can find it on land, but very, very unusually. And what do beavers do? Well, the way I like to describe it is beavers have got a massive toolbox of behaviors that they have evolved over millions and millions of years. So they can choose to delve into this toolbox, or they can choose not to. So burrowing. So they do burrow if there are sediments that are suitable for burrowing, and the water fluctuations suit having a burrow. then beavers will go and build a burrow. They can build a kind of instant burrow overnight, maybe half a metre long, that would be as a temporary place of shelter. But sometimes if they're building a burrow that's going to be more of a permanent structure, that might be up to 5 metres long. Quite often it will be on a bank that's raised up. So they will have the entrance underneath the water and they'll burrow up through the bank. And the chamber usually will, well, the chamber will be higher than the water level fluctuations in that particular water body or in that particular river, because the beavers don't want to be wet in their burrow. They want to have a dry chamber where they can go and sleep. So sometimes they burrow. They sometimes will fell. So usually in the wintertime, you see more felling behaviour going on. So trees will be taken down, usually between 5 to 20 centimetres. That doesn't take a beaver too long to get through. So about a 20 centimetre diameter tree or sapling would take a beaver probably 5 minutes to go and take down. 5 centimetres would just be maybe just a minute itself. They also build, which impressed people no end. So we can see a picture of a fairly typical lodge. It's quite a big one, and they do get really quite sizable. Some lodges, they reckon, have been in existence for maybe hundreds of years in North America. To the left-hand side of the picture, close to the water's edge, this isn't the entrance, but there's a little ramp that allows the beavers to go and climb up and go and drag material up onto the top of the lodge itself. The first 3 pairs of beavers, care pairs and families of beavers that we've released, they've been really busy repairing and augmenting their lodges over the summer months. So what we tend to see is we'll see dry material or vegetation pulled on in a layer, and then they'll start to shift mud about and start plastering the lodge with mud, and then they'll repeat with another layer of vegetation or woody material, and then they'll start plastering again. But what we are seeing is the lodge augmentation behaviour is really starting to tail off now. And again, that's to do with the day length. It's telling the beavers winter is coming, so you've done all your lodge repairs, you've augmented it, and now it's time to go and focus on making a food cache. And the overall activity of the beavers reduces, and that ties in with food availability reducing as well. So obviously, spring, summer, and autumn, there's lots of plants that are growing, so you can go and feed lots and be very active. But in the winter time, they can ease off on the activity, and that means that they don't have such a big demand for food. So they'll get through the winter with the big pile of branches underwater that they've stored for themselves. They can also build dams. They can build dams out of wood. They can build dams out of mud. They will often make a foundation out of stones if possible. And this innate behaviour that they've got of damming certain sizes, about maybe maximum of 6 metres wide, a watercourse 6 metres wide, with about 4 metres per second of flow going through, and probably not much more than 5 degrees of fall. Those are sort of the parameters that they're looking at. So anything less in width, less in gradient, and less in flow, that's all fair game for damming. And also, beavers can do a little bit of magic, which you'll see later on. So they build lodges or burrows that are warm, dry, and well designed. So it's got an underwater entrance, because going into a burrow and leaving a burrow is the most dangerous time for a beaver, because it can't see what's waiting for them. And so when there's predators in other countries such as wolves or bears or perhaps even lynx, then the beavers would be vulnerable. So they make sure that their entrance is underwater so they can get in and out of their burrows or lodges without being seen. They also have 2 chambers in their lodges and their burrows. So they have a hallway or a vestibule, which is pretty much at the level of the water. So they'll come through the underwater entrance, and then they'll come up, and then they'll crawl out into this damp area, which is the hallway. So they will eat any of the food reserves they've got during the winter time. That's where they'll consume the food. They will groom each other there. They will also shake themselves to dry off, and then they will go up a little ways to a higher chamber, which is dry, and that is where they'll sleep. So they don't do their grooming, and they don't do their feeding there. That's just purely for sleep. And the vestibule that's close to the water, that's where all of that other activity goes on. So all good houses should, of course, have a hallway. And the beavers have figured that one out a long, long time ago. They're also very robust. the lodges themselves, once they get really big and frozen in the wintertime, are pretty much bear proof. So this is a bit like reinforced concrete. So you've got plastered layers of softer material, and then you've got the reinforcing bars, which are all the bits of vegetation, all of the bits of wood in a haphazard crisscross fashion, which are very, very difficult to go and pull apart once packed down and also once frozen. And because of the mass of the burrows, or particularly the mass of the lodges, they're thermally very stable, so they don't get too cold even in really cold weather. And usually there is a little sort of thinner part of the burrow, of the burrow, and also of the lodge itself, which does allow air to escape. So there is a little bit of ventilation, because otherwise it would just get, there wouldn't be enough kind of fresh air coming in. So sometimes if there's a burrow, you might see some sticks on top of the land close to where the burrow is, and that's usually a slightly sort of thinner part of the burrow that's allowing a little bit of air exchange, and the beaver's kind of protecting that by putting some sticks over the top of it. This particular lodge, you can see there's actually some juniper that's been incorporated into it. So as far as we've seen, they've not eaten the bark of the juniper, but they're just using it as material for the lodge. And this is at Rothiemurchus. This is at the Lily Loch, which is our the site where we first released the beavers, and it's also on the Beaver Trail, which we co-funded with Rothiemurchus Estate. And it's the place we really direct everybody to go and see beavers, because there's lots of interpretation there, and we were very successful seeing beavers there in the springtime. So far, the last 2 beaver watches that I've done in September haven't been quite successful, but once the vegetation dies down a bit, I'm hoping that it will be a great place to go and watch beavers. Now, of course, contentiously, they sometimes build dams. These dams are leaky and they will go overtopped at high water flows. They will also get blown out during spates. So this particular picture that you can see on the right is an overtop beaver dam in Norway. If you look closely, you'll see there's actually quite a lot of trees along the riparian zone. And what beavers will do is they will transform the riparian zones. So as long as there's sufficient trees there, what will happen is beaver activity will be concentrated closest to the water. So large diameter trees will eventually get taken down, large diameter palatable broadleaf trees. And what you'll be replaced with is lots of bushes effectively, or lots of poles coming up. And they will be regularly taken down. So what you will get is you will get much more of you'll still get shade, you still will get cover in the riparian zone, but it'll be more of a dappled shade, probably about maybe 5 to 10% of the canopy cover that you would have before beavers were there. And as you go further away from the water, you will start to get much larger trees because the beavers aren't going too far away from the water. Now, beavers can also create canals as well, which probably inspired people as well. So if the substrate is suitable, they can dig in a channel off a river or off a water body to allow them to get to more food. And if they're transporting wood, it's a lot easier to drag it through water than it is to drag it over land. So canals are another thing that we can go and build. But because often people, when they think of dams, they think of human-made dams, and these are impermeable to fish passage and an awful lot of wildlife. But beaver dams aren't like that. They are leaky. Water does go through them. Beavers don't get driven mad by the sound of flowing water, because a lot of them live in rivers and they seem, pretty even keeled, it has to be said. And they do react to the sound of flowing water. So they're very sensitive to changes in pressure in water as well. And they will know when the water level drops behind the dam that the dam has been breached, and therefore they need to go and repair that. But they're quite happy with some flow of water. But it's a combination of a lot of water flow, change in water pressure, dropping in water levels. It's a combination of these factors which will tell the beaver, oh, there's something wrong with the dam, I need to go and do something about it. But the dams are impermeable, they do get overtopped. And so, for example, this overtopping dam will, of course, allow salmonid fish passage. So salmon and sea trout will be able to go and swim up that dam, no problem at all. During low flow events, the fish will struggle to go and get over the dams, but eventually some rain will come and that will allow the fish to go and move over those particular dams. And there's a real benefit of these dams for the younger stages of fish. So what you will tend to find is you will find less fish fry, but you'll find them much, much bigger. So the habitat, the still water habitat behind the dam is full of insects and is really, really good for the young stages of the fish. Also, the dams will catch sediment that comes downstream. So it's quite possible that very close to a dam, if there's a lot of sediment coming down, it might cover the gravel redds or the beds where the Atlantic salmon lay their eggs. But also downstream of the dam, it will clear more. So this is one of the things that we're really interested in researching at the national park. And we're going to be working with the Spey Fishery Board and their biologists. So when a beaver does build a dam in a salmon spawning stream, we will monitor it very closely to see actually what happens. And obviously, if there is an effect that's unacceptable in the fish, then we can intervene, and there's various different techniques that we can utilize. So I did say that beavers can do magic. And for those that are familiar with Tommy Cooper, just like that, the poor beaver that did this obviously was just didn't know what was going on, because these were two rowan trees that were growing close together. The branches had intertwined, and the beaver had felled the tree and thought, right, okay, it's going to fall over because that's what trees do. And it didn't. It was hung up in the other tree. So what the beaver did is it chewed about another foot of trunk away to try and get it to fall over. And it still didn't fall over. And eventually what happened is the weight of the cut tree on the uncut tree bent it down. So now that tree is about 90 degrees. It's parallel with the ground. So it's bent over about 90 degrees. But the beaver really must have been scratching its head when the tree was just levitating. These particular beavers, they favor rowan trees and willow trees. And it seems that the beavers have particular preferences for what tree species they prefer. There's another pair that are nearby, and they very much favor willow. That's their favorite thing. This is the hind footprint. No, it's the hind footprint of a beaver, so about 20 centimeters long in the mud. And why did we decide as the Park Authority to bring beaver back? Well, it wasn't just the Park Authority, it was also through Nature Scot as well, who put together the Scottish Beaver Strategy. But they're one key action to help deal with the climate and ecological emergency. And one species return can benefit multiple species that they've co-evolved with through the creation of complex wetland habitats. And eventually, in time, when the beaver population expands and increases in number, they will eventually act at scale, although perhaps quite subtly. So they won't necessarily completely transform our landscape, but they certainly will make wetlands wetter. And they can be a flagship species for riparian woodland and wetland restoration, facilitating transformative change. And it is really important to remember that beavers have been part of the Western Eurasian biota for 1.5 million years. So beavers have been beavers in their current form for 1.5 million years. And so trees like willow, aspen, rowan, all sorts of different aquatic plants, all sorts of insects, all sorts of birds, all sorts of amphibians have all co-evolved to live in this complex wetland habitat that beavers can create. And by taking beavers away, we've taken a key component of the ecology of many of these species. So I'm just really fascinated to see what effects the beavers are actually going to have on the ground within the Cairngorms National Park Authority in terms, hopefully, of increasing the biodiversity of our wetland areas, which will have a big knock-on effect for lots and lots of other species. And this is just to give you an example of what beavers can do. So this is a place called Mill Dam, so just near Dunkeld. There's a whacking great man-made dam right at the end of Victorian Dam, off to the right of that picture. The sluice broke, so the water levels have dropped. So this area was starting to dry out, and we can tell that because where the dead trees are, they were originally living alder trees. So the wetland had dried out, and that had allowed the trees to grow up. Then the beavers moved in, and there's a beaver dam that's maybe about 50 to 60 centimeters high, just beyond where the patch of bracken is on the right-hand side of the picture. So there's a main channel, there's bracken, orangey, rusty-coloured bracken on the right-hand side, and some beautiful larches. Just beyond that, at the end of that channel, there's a dam that goes on for a couple of 100 meters, and that's backed up the water sufficiently to drown the trees, fantastic, habitat for insects and for woodpeckers. And you can see the drainage, the canals that the beavers have created just simply by moving through the wetland vegetation. And just look at all the different colors, and just look at all the different textures. There is no way that humans could create a wetland like that. We just, even with all the money in the world, we couldn't create something like that. But beavers do it pretty much for free. And it's just the complexity of the habitat is what makes it so valuable, particularly for things like water voles. So down in Devon, they've done studies looking at water vole, and they found the water vole numbers have increased in beaver modified wetlands because they're so complex. There's lots of hiding places, and if there's lots of different textures, different shapes, different hiding places, then there's lots and lots of different niches for many different species. So why are we doing this? In line with the Scottish Beaver Strategy, we are working with a broad partnership to establish a healthy, self-sustaining population of beavers in the Upper Spey catchment. We focused on the Upper Spey catchment because NatureScot had identified that the Spey had the greatest area of high-quality beaver habitat in all of the catchments in Scotland. And the Upper Spey in particular, and the area between Kingussie and down to Aviemore, was the best of the best. So we're looking at a lot of 10 out of 10 quality habitats in that particular area. So we focused on that area, and initially in February, it was February last year, we undertook some informal chats, beaver blathers, just to talk about the idea of bringing beavers back into that area, answering people's questions, getting an idea of what people were thinking about it. Also, the area between Kingussie and Aviemore, the land use there, there's not a great deal of farmland, there's pretty much no farmland, which is beside the river itself, downstream from the A9 bridge. And any farmland tends to be much further away, so it's very unlikely to be affected by any beaver activity. And to date, there's been no beaver activity that's affected the agricultural land in that particular area. So why are we doing that? Well, the Park Authority believes that beavers' benefits far outweigh any adverse impacts that they may cause, and that any adverse impacts can be successfully mitigated. And of course, what an adverse impact is really depends on the individual. So it depends on the landowners or the land manager's land use, and it also depends on what they think about beavers. So there's not a definitive suite of adverse impact, because what might be an adverse impact in one person's land, another person might not think that is an adverse impact. But obviously we've got to take that aboard, and we've also got to be able to go and respond very quickly if people are finding that there's adverse impacts, and we need to go and mitigate them. So where are we doing this? We talked about between Aviemore and Kingussie. The locations were Rothiemurchus, Wildland Limited, the RSPB Inchmarshes, and there's also another private estate which has come on board this particular year. I've got a nice example on the right of a birch that has been taken down, and you can really see very, very clearly the tooth marks. And if you just imagine if you had a chisel and you were trying to chisel that tree down, it would be incredibly difficult. And it really does give you an appreciation of just how powerful beavers' jaws are and just how sharp their teeth are, which are actually orange because they're reinforced with iron oxide in the enamel. So you've got a lovely orangey colour to them. And also you can see that the felled tree has got this pencil point, which is very distinctive. That's the beavers will go round, usually all the way around a tree, gnawing away at it, creating a face that's about 135 degrees. And then once they get all the way around and the top of the pencil gets thin enough, the beaver will hear that it starts to crack, and then they will usually run away, hopefully in the right direction. Usually when beavers are felling trees close to a river, the branches tend to be on the riverside because that's where the light is. So when beavers are felling a tree, more often than not, the tree will actually fell towards the water. And that's something that the beaver does learn over time. And unfortunately, not all beavers learn that. And sometimes, tree felling is a risky business. So how did we go about gathering people's opinions? So we went to various shows. This was at the Granton show last year. And so we gathered the views of local people, communities, stakeholders, communities of interest to provide testimony of their opinions of the project for our license application. And we we're very sincere when we spoke to people. We were saying, we really want to hear, we're going to write down and we're going to note what you say. We're not going to put any spin on it. And that's what's going to go to Nature Scott, because they're the people that are going to make the decision. So we had a 6-week engagement process where we consulted widely and we gathered lots and lots of views. And we eventually pulled together a report that was actually over 90 pages long of all the different opinions, the result from the online surveys that we did. And we put all of that to Nature Scott as part of our license application. So because beavers are a European protected species, to translocate them outwith of their current range, we needed to get a license to go and do that. So there's a couple of licenses that we needed to go and get, and we also needed to have proof of support for the application, and we also needed to have a plan to go and deal with any adverse impacts that the beavers would cause. So these are some of the consultation results that we had. So 42 days of formal engagement, 115 online survey respondents, 393 comments received online or at events, 104 people attended the 6 events that we ran in total. Nearly 85,000 people reached on social media, lots of video views, and 18 visits. And there's now way more than 18 visits with site visits with landowners and land managers. That has been ongoing since after the submission of the license application. So that is something that we are maintaining, and it's not going to stop just because we've got the license. So we're continuing to engage with lots of different people, and primarily with landowners and land managers regarding beavers, and listening to their concerns about it, and also trying to reassure them that we have the capacity to go and deal with the things that are concerning them. And of course, these conversations are still continuing. So the 25th of September 2023, the consultation finished, and then we started drawing together the report to go and make a submission, a license submission. Now, as part of the license submission, and this was at the same time as we were doing the public engagement, is we had to come up with a plan for protected habitats and species. So to identify if any particular habitats or species that were protected under European legislation and also national legislation, if they were going to be adversely impacted. So we had a big table looking at all the different species, looking at all the different impacts. And what really came out of that was a program of monitoring to go and ensure that we would be able to find out if there was going to be any adverse impact. So some of the species we've got here, we've got freshwater pearl mussel in the bottom right-hand side. We've got aspen, the tree that you hear before you see it, on the left-hand side, and we've got Atlantic salmon as well. Aspen in the Spey catchment, we've got the largest area of aspen in the whole of Scotland, and there's a lot of very specific insects and lichens and mosses that are all associated with the aspens. And of course, one of beavers' favourite foods is actually aspen. And some of the release sites are very close to quite extensive areas of aspen. So we've had to come up with a plan for that. But what we found is, kind of contrary to everything that I'd read about beavers, is so far they've only taken down 3 aspen trees. And that's only really been in the last 2 months. So obviously things might change because it's not quite been a year since they've been released. But I've been really surprised that the beavers haven't gone for aspen as much as you would think if you'd read the literature round about it. But obviously we are keeping an eye on that, and we have protected some of the larger aspen trees to make sure that they don't get taken down by the beavers. But the aspen that have been taken down were within 2 or 3 meters of the watercourse itself. Now, if you want to have a look at our license application, the engagement report, the protected habitats and species, the monitoring and mitigation plan, it's all on the beaver pages on the Cairngorms National Park Authority website. And there's lots and lots of content there if you want to go and delve into it. So we'd done all this work, we'd pulled all of this material together, and we submitted the license on the 20th of October, 2023, and I went on holiday that day for 2 weeks. I was very glad to do so. It was a very intense period of time. Then there was a bit of additional information that Nature Scott asked us for, and we supplied them with that. And then on the 6th of December, 2023, we got our license, the approval was granted, but with certain conditions, which were in the first year, we were not allowed to release any single beavers, it had to be pairs or families. And within the first year, we were not allowed to release more than 6 pairs or families. And over the length of the license, we were restricted to the release of 15 pairs or families, and for that to total no more than 50 individuals. So we've got a 5-year license that's allowing us to release 15 pairs or families over that period of time. And then the first beavers released on the 18th of December. So you might notice that there was 12 days from getting the license, getting the beavers out. And I have to say, I think quite a few individuals were a little bit surprised that things happened quite so quickly. But once we had the license and once it had been approved, and certainly the Park Authority felt that we had the monitoring and mitigation plan in place, there was no reason not to go ahead with it. And yeah, being a little bit jokey, I think people were surprised that things moved quite so fast for the public agency. That's just one of these things. But there was no reason not to release the beavers. The beavers were available. The beavers we released have all come from Tayside. So usually these beavers are moving, usually young individuals that are moving into territories where there are no beavers because previously the beavers have been removed, often right about where agricultural land is, and their impacts are deemed unacceptable by the landowner there. So they get a license to go and trap the beavers, and rather than euthanizing the beavers, these get taken into captivity, they get health checked, and then they get released. So we got our first, this is the female beaver leaving the cage. The first release site was the Lily Loch at Rothiemurchus, which was, it was a fantastic thing to be involved with. I opened the cage of the second animal, so the Lorna Slater, the then Minister for Biodiversity, and Grant Moyer, our Chief Executive at the Park Authority, and they opened the first cage, the beaver went out, so that was the female, and then I got to open the cage with the grumpy male, who hissed at me, and beavers make about 6 vocalizations, but when they're hissing, it's not good. And the grumpy male beaver stomped towards me as I made a tactical reverse through a juniper bush. And all the beaver experts and everybody that was there just was laughing at me, and I was looking at them for some help, but they were just in stitches basically. So I took 5 steps backwards, and the beaver took 5 steps forward. I got out of its way. Honor was satisfied. The beaver turned round and went back into the water, and that was them. And so it's been what? That's now nearly 10 months. The beavers have been there, and they settled in so well that the beavers at Rothiemurchus actually had a kit. So we've only seen the kit twice on the camera that we've got in the lodge. So it may have been the same kit, it may have been another kit, we don't know, but we know there's at least one kit there, and it's a sign of animals settling down, doing well, they're in good condition. If all of those boxes are ticked, then they tend to breed successfully. So it really was, it's shown that we'd released them in the best possible area. They hadn't been disturbed, and they bred successfully. And it was just, I did let out a whoop of delight when I saw that particular kit. It was absolutely fantastic. So we released pair at Rothiemurchus. There was a pair in wild land. There was a family, another family in wild land. Then there was 3 pairs of families that were released on inch marshes in March 2024. And that totaled 18 beavers. And then with the addition of 2 pairs have produced at least 1 kit, we've now got at least 20 beavers after year 1. So that was really, really pleasing for that to happen. And yeah, believe it or not, year 2 has started already. So we had our first release on wild land last week, and we've got ongoing releases that will take place and probably be finished by early November. It all depends on beaver availability, because they have to go through their health checks. They also have to be trapped, then go through health checks at Five Sisters Zoo, and then we speak to the Beaver Trust before then, and they say how many, they determine how many can be released in a particular area of land, because they go and do the survey of the release sites to go and determine there's enough vegetation for them, there's enough cover, and it's suitable either for a pair or suitable for a family, depending on how remote the sites are. So this year there'll be 2 releases on wild land limited, one on the private landowner site and one on Loch Morlich. And just last night we had a drop-in session for the local community. So we got 8 members of the local community came along. We got 2 businesses as well, and they were on the whole really quite positive about that. And Forestry and Land Scotland are obviously very keen to go and release beavers. And yeah, it'll be really interesting to see where beavers decide to go and end up. Obviously, there is a concern because Loch Morlich is a very busy site, but then so is the Lily Loch, and people go wild swimming, dogs go into the water close to the dam, people are cycling and walking past there all the way through the daytime, and the beavers have done quite well. And as long as the beavers have got a lodge that's not being disturbed and they've got places they can get away from people, they can tolerate quite a lot of human activity. And also, primarily, their activity is between dawn and dusk. They're not active the whole time between dawn and dusk, but usually just before dusk, they tend to get active, and they will be active at night time. And that's when very few people are about. So we're very hopeful that the Loch Morlich release will be successful. The beavers are going to find a quiet place to build a burrow or a lodge, and hopefully in due course they will go and breed, because there is a lot of very good habitat round about there and lots of food for them. So just to wind up, what does the Beaver Project Manager do? Well, it's quite a broad remit, I would say. So we've talked about public engagement, site monitoring. So every week I go out on beaver patrol. And so we go and look at the existing release sites, and we also look at areas that we've identified as potentially being of high impact sites. And this is, comes from a risk assessment matrix. So if you've got the high impact site and you've got high likelihood of something happening, then you get a risk. But if you've got a high impact site, so for example, trees by a road, but there's no beavers there, or the beavers aren't taking down any of the trees, aren't gnawing the trees, then there's not an issue there. But we've tried to identify as many of these high risk sites as possible. And it might be for, say, trees falling on a road. It might be for a woodland of particular high importance for lichens. And these will be places that we will go and monitor on a weekly basis, just to make sure we've got an eye on what the beavers are up to. And if they are doing something which would be an unacceptable impact, then we would start to go and take forward mitigation. And at the moment, really, what our monitoring is showing is a limited amount of activity. And we've had, really, we've only had to intervene once so far. And that was trees that were by a loch, which were close to a road. They were leaning over the road, and the beavers were starting to gnaw those trees. And we decided that we really needed to go and take those trees down. So we engaged a tree surgeon to come along. The trees were felled, the trunks were left in situ. The beavers came pretty much the next day and thought, fantastic, these trees have come down, and they stripped all the bark off them. But there's a limited number of places where we have trees close to a water body, very close to a road. But we decided at that particular point, that's where we're going to intervene. So these are things that, you know, the monitoring and mitigation plan has worked. Yeah, I'll be interested to see how things develop into the future. Other things to do, stakeholder engagement events and organising events. So the drop-in session was something I organised, and stakeholder engagement really is ongoing. So now we've got the licence, the engagement that we have is regular reporting. So we've got a farmers and landowners group of the Cairngorms Agricultural Advisory Group. And that particular group, we're going to have a meeting, I think, at the beginning of November, and we'll give them a 6-monthly update on what the beavers have been up to, and also what we've been up to as well. And delivering beaver mitigation. So in time, when beavers start to build dams, so far we've only had one small dam. If beavers build dams, then we might be looking at dam removal potentially, dam notching, putting in flow devices, and certainly, you know, that's going to evolve over time as the beavers increase in number and start to have, you know, a greater amount of impact on land, which has probably previously been drained, and the beavers are trying to make wetter again. Also feeding the beavers, I do hasten to add, not by hand. So during the release of the beavers, we've got a 6-week period. For the first 2 weeks, we feed the beavers every day. And then for the 4 weeks after that, we feed them 3 days a week. And we're feeding them to get them to come to trail cameras, because we need to ensure that within the first 6 weeks, the beavers they're in good condition, and they're behaving normally, and they're uninjured. And after a 6-week period, if all of those criteria are met, then we would say that was a successful release. And that criteria was something that's been developed through the NAPSAIL project, which obviously SWT was, so Scottish Wildlife Trust was involved in latterly. So after that 6-week period, we don't feed the beavers anymore. And the carrots that we do feed them are just a snack it's in no way sustaining them, because simply I couldn't afford to buy enough pony carrots to feed a beaver completely on them, especially if it's a large family. So it's very much just a little snack just to get them to go and come to the cameras. And we got some really delightful videos of particularly the female beaver at Rothiemurchus tidying little plates of ice away from her little sort of hole when the ice froze over in the loch. When she kept coming to the beavers, she kept that area of the loch clear. And when she came through the ice with those little plates of ice, we've got a video of her sort of like tidying the ice and moving it to the edge and just keeping everything kind of nice and neat, which was, just tickled me no end. And also when we fed the beavers carrots covered in soil for the first time. They were used to pony carrots, which are obviously cleaned, and then all of a sudden the beaver took a bite and was like, oh, it's got some soil on it. And so waddled down to the water, gave it a clean, and then started to eat the carrot. So beavers don't like dirty carrot and like to go and clean it first. We've also organised kit watches for not so much for members of the public, but members of the Park Authority and also for the Highland Wildlife Park. And we've certainly given lots of advice to wildlife watching companies, wildlife tour companies, about where to go watching. And one of them did a watch at the end of April last year, April this year rather. And they got a sighting of beaver and they were just incredibly happy. Handing out beaver sticks. I have an almost unlimited supply of beaver sticks, certainly in the winter time. We get an awful lot of them. And just today I was at Alvey and Dalradi Estates, and I was speaking to Heidi in reception, and she was quite keen to have a beaver stick. So obviously I have one in the car. So she was very happy to go and get a beaver stick. And they are really beautiful objects. It's amazing how powerfully the beaver can go and cut the wood, and then how delicately they nibble the bark off it. It's absolutely incredible. And then building brash lodges, that's something I did Tuesday morning and last Friday. When we release beavers onto a loch, again, we're asked to prepare the site, and that usually involves felling 3 trees into the water, which means that the beavers have got ready access to a food supply, which is in the water, and also building a pile of sticks, pile of brash, about the size of a dinner table, and that means that the beavers can go in and hide in those areas and take shelter. What we've found is that out of all of the releases, the beavers only used one of these brash lodges for about 1 week, and then the water level rose and they went and deserted it. Amusingly, the beavers on the first wildland release, we set up a trail camera, we had a feeding station, and we had the brash lodge nearby. And on the trail camera, we got lots of footage of them dismantling the brash pile that we created and then moving it about 10 meters and building a new lodge to their specifications. So human-made brash lodges don't work for beavers in general. They just want to go and build it to their specification. It's a really, really broad remit, and it's pretty much anything beaver related is what I do. Now we're going to have some time for questions because for once I've just about kept the time. If you want to get more information, if you go to the Cairngorms National Park Authority website, you can just put in the search engine, just do Cairngorms Park Authority Beaver, you get straight to the page. Our website's soon going to be updated, but the information will still be available. And there's lots and lots of information there about beavers in general, the process that we've gone through, all of the documents that we created for the submission to our license application, and lots of questions and answers all about beavers and what they do. But I very much look forward to your questions now. So we're going to hand it over to Dan. Thanks very much.
That's great. Thanks very much, Jonathan, for a really fascinating talk about this incredible animal. And I can see in the Q&A already, there's quite a lot of questions. So if you do have any questions, anyone else, just feel free to type them into the Q&A, and you'll see there as well that you can actually upvote the questions as well. So we'll go to those ones first that get the most votes. So we'll dive straight in. So Jonathan, the first question is, how many beavers are needed for self-sustaining and genetically diverse population, and what are the dispersal dynamics?
Right, that's 2 questions. So the reason that we were in the license, it was 50 beavers, 50 individuals, is that was between Nature Scott and the Beaver Trust. That was the decision. That would be sufficient to have a genetically diverse population. So it's not a hard 50. It could be a little bit more potentially, but round about that number, that is a good founding population. They've done genetic studies on the beavers in Scotland, so initially the Tayside beavers, and they found out, I think going through the mitochondrial DNA, there was 18 individuals that were actually the founder population. It wasn't 18 at one time, it was over a period of time. So there is a relatively narrow genetic base, which at some point will need to be augmented. But at the moment, there's no problem with the genetic diversity of beavers that we have. The most important thing is to have sufficient beavers that are not related to each other that can find mates. And the problem that's been in some areas is because there's been no beavers nearby, then you get beavers mating with close relations. So because we've got lots of families that are going to start producing young, the kits are going to find it quite easy to go and find a mate that they're not related to. Also, it's worth saying that the Bavarian beavers that we talk about, which are the beavers in the Tay, all came from Bavaria. One of the reasons for that was Bavaria introduced beavers in 1966. The population expanded massively, and there was basically a lot of Europe has been populated by Bavarian beavers. But the Bavarian beavers are not Bavarian because there was no beavers there. So the Bavarian beavers are a mix of Norwegian, French, Belarusian, and Russian ones as well, but not East German beavers, because in 1966, because East and West Germany weren't speaking, the East Germans wouldn't give the capitalists their beavers. So the Bavarian beavers have actually got a really mixed genetic ancestry, so they're actually in a very, very good status. So 50 beavers will have give us a genetically diverse founder population. The dispersal dynamics. Now, beavers don't read the books, so they're never going to do exactly what are in the books. But what we're planning to do by releasing beavers very close together in suitable habitat, that will mean that the dispersing beavers won't have to travel a long distance to go and find a mate. So that's our expectation, but already we've had one beaver that's traveled 20 kilometres up to Spey Dam and back from Kingusie. So there will be wandering that goes on, beavers do explore, but we expect that the dispersal of them won't be great because there's lots of suitable habitat and there should be lots of mates for them to go and find as well.
Right. And so the next question, if the number of beavers increase significantly, is there a risk of them becoming a nuisance? Or do generally the benefits outweigh the risks?
It's an excellent question, but it's very much in your personal perspective. So one person's nuisance is another person's delight. I think I would say what would happen when beavers numbers increase, then they will start to have more impact potentially on things like culverts and infrastructure. But these things can be mitigated against. But again, we feel as the Park Authority that the benefits of a large population of beavers in suitable habitat will outweigh the effort of mitigating some of the impacts that they have. I mean, that really kind of underpins why the Park Authority has taken this forward, because we do feel that the impacts of beavers can be mitigated, and if the impacts are dealt with early on, they don't become such a big issue. And I think really sort of nipping things in the bud is the key thing, and a fast reaction is what the Park Authority wants to take forward. And we do want to be an exemplar of best practice to show that we can live with beavers, because lots and lots of other countries are doing it with many more beavers than we have now.
Next question is, given the amount of flooding experienced in some of the introduction areas mentioned, do you have a view on the benefits of beavers to counter flooding?
Again, a really, really excellent question. And I think you have to be very careful not to oversell beavers. So, for example, beavers are not going to cause flooding of the River Spey, and they're not going to be able to contain the flooding of the River Spey. The catchment is so massive, there's lots of area where beavers would not be able to go and build dams to hold back the water. So they won't have an effect on the hydrodynamics of the Spey catchment in totality, but on low gradient, relatively short catchment, well wooded watercourses, beavers could have a very profound impact on the flow regime there. But we have to be very careful about what beavers can and can't do. But also by having an impact on smaller catchments, particularly because there's so much gravel within the spey catchment. If they're holding water back, we could actually see quite significant amounts of recharge of groundwater from those particular dammed areas. So again, it's just very much dependent. It'll be from burn to burn as to what impact the beavers will have.
And someone's asking, do beavers have any natural predators?
Yes, another excellent question. Do beavers have natural predators? So in Britain, the two things that are most likely to kill a beaver are another beaver during territorial aggression and a car. So motor accidents are one of the, sort of the major causes of mortality for adult beavers. In continental Europe, you'll get bears, wolves, lynx, even pine martens seemingly go for kits, really small kits in the lodges sometimes, and white-tailed eagles as well, a possibility. In the UK, the kits are the most vulnerable to predation. So when they come out of the lodge, they're about 500 grams. Maybe by the end of the winter, so at the end of the first winter, they'll be getting maybe 7 or 8 kilograms if they put on an awful lot of weight. So they're actually quite small. So the young kits are vulnerable to predation by otters, pike, foxes, and badgers. Could, if they came across a kit, they would probably go and take that. And again, possibly white-tailed eagles, but there's not an awful lot of them. Certainly in the central part of Scotland, well, certainly in Strathspey. So the kits can have quite high mortality, but studies have shown that there's a 92% survival rate of the kits in Scotland so far in some of the surveys that have been done in limited areas. So the beavers will, the adults, when they get to a certain density, other adults, if there's lots of fighting, that will lead to mortality. Car accidents are another one, but the kits are usually the most vulnerable to predation, and there are predators of them. Otters probably being the most significant one.
And do you think we, i.e. humans, might have also learned the technique of wattle and daub for building from the way beavers build their lodges?
That's really, I'd never thought of that.
Me neither, yeah.
But quite absolutely. Again, I've got some. I don't usually share videos because there's just too much opportunity for them to go wrong. But we've got some really nice videos of beavers. So what they do is they've got their hands are a little bit like Tommy Cooper, so like forklift trucks. So when they're lifting things, they can't turn their paws round and hold. So they hold like this. So they shovel up a whole load of mud and stick it under their chins and then bounce on their tail and kind of waddle forward until they kind of tip over. And then they'll dump the pile of mud that they've got and then they'll smear it. So they're going like this, and then they nose it in to get it into the lodges. So it's quite possible that people could have been inspired by that because, yeah, you do the wood, you do the mud. We'll never know, but it's a strong possibility.
And someone's asking, organizations are planting more and more trees to provide much needed shade for salmon, sea trout, and trout. It's clear on rivers that beavers have great numbers on that the much needed shade is disappearing. What can be done to prevent this?
That's a really good point to go and make. Again, what I would say is, unlike humans, beavers don't clear fell. So in areas where beavers come into, they will increase the amount of light coming into a closed canopy woodland about 20-fold. So they will reduce the canopy cover, but they won't get rid of the canopy completely. When beavers start to find it difficult to go and get enough food, they will move on to another area. So they don't tend to exhaust an area utterly. It just gets, so there's not enough trees here, I'm going to move on to somewhere else. And I think, again, we have to think about what is natural. What did the fish evolve with? And the fish evolved with extensive areas of riparian woodland that were impacted by beavers. That was the fish's experience. over the last however many interglacial periods that we've had in the last 1.5 million years. So beavers have ebbed and flowed, moving north and then moving south as the glaciers, have kind of come and gone. I think the key thing is we need more riparian woodland, and I certainly feel that the beavers ask questions. So yes, the beavers might take some trees down, but in a lot of places, our riparian zone is one tree wide. So obviously, if a beaver takes down one tree, then all of a sudden the riparian zone is gone. And so what we need is we need much more riparian woodland. And if there's a large amount of riparian woodland along all of our riverbanks, then the impact of the beavers is really going to be minimal. So I would say that we need to get more trees out. And some people do say, oh, we shouldn't plant trees because they'll be impacted by beavers. But beavers will only take trees once they get to a certain size. And if you're planting the right species, you don't kill the tree, you just get a coppice coming back up. And studies in North America have shown that if a beaver takes a medium-sized willow down, about 80% of the biomass will grow back within 2 years. So basically, you'll get, rather than a single stem tree, you're going to get a bush coming back. So I think it's a really valid concern to go and have, but we just need more trees in riparian areas. And that's something that the Park Authority is working with other organisations to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And as habitat engineers, will beavers have any impact on the lilies at Lily Lock?
Yes. The answer is yes, they have had an impact on the water lilies. So there are less water lilies there than there used to be. But I spoke to Peter Ferguson, who's worked there at Rothiemurchus for 30 years, and he said when they were fly fishing on the Lily Loch, there was a lot less reeds and there was a lot less water lilies because there was more disturbance because the boats were going round. So last year, before the beavers were released, there was probably about 80% coverage of vegetation over the water, either water lilies or reeds. And over the last 10 months, the beavers have eaten a lot of the water lilies and they have eaten an awful lot of the reeds, but they're still there. And also, one of the books that I read this year about beavers was indicating that water lily seeds can actually be spread further by them ingesting them and also from breaking up the bits of plant. And it'll be really interesting to see because anecdotally, over at Knapdale, the beaver trial site, Peter Creech, who works over there, has seen the water lilies actually expand because the beavers make a mess and create muddy areas. There's new places for the water lilies to go and spread to. So I think what you'll see is if there's lots of water lilies in an area, beavers move in, the water lilies will reduce in number but won't disappear, and then they will reach an equilibrium. But if it's an extensive wetland area, I think what you will see is you'll start to see actually the spread of water lilies round about that area. And certainly on inch marshes, there's the least water lily, the yellow one, and it's going to be really interesting to see it's found in one or two sites. It's going to be really interesting to see if that spreads more through beaver activity. And that's one of the species that we're actually monitoring. So again, they do have an impact, but there's a co-evolution there. So they will just reach a new equilibrium.
And how are we planning on controlling the beaver population, seeing as we don't have as many predators?
That's a really good question. Are we seeking to control the beaver population? And I think that really depends on impacts. So the director of nature and climate change at the park, he always says it's not to do with the numbers of beavers, it's to do with the impact that they have. So you could have like 100 beavers in an area, and people are happy with what they do. You could have one beaver and it does something that someone's unhappy with or is having an impact on, productive agricultural land, and then we'd have to go and do something about that. And I think I do feel in some places that beavers could reach their natural capacity within a particular habitat, and they will sort out, through territorial aggression, they will sort out the density of beavers in that area, and then there'll be other areas. Probably more likely around about villages and in built up areas with infrastructure, then maybe we would seek to sort of manage the beavers there, because if they got to their carrying capacity, the beavers' carrying capacity, then potentially the impact would be unacceptable on local residents. But I do feel that we're quite far away from that. Sort of in our area, it will take a number of years to go and get there. But I think we could be quite surprised as to the small area where beavers may actually have an impact that affects people that we find unacceptable. And again, that's just something we're going to have to kind of work towards. But we've got an idea of where those potential areas might be, but it'll be interesting to see how it develops over time.
And do beavers get on with otters?
Well, not when they eat their young. So it seemed that in Loch Lomond, so there was two parents and four kits, and the otter was caught on camera, and it took two of the kits. So what you would expect is after that experience, then the beaver parents would all of a sudden be much more aggressive towards otters that were coming anywhere near them, because obviously they want to go and defend their kits. And it really does depend. In some cases, you probably find otters would be, so beavers would be dominant over otters and chasing them away. And in other times, if there was a really big dog otter, and I heard the story of this down in Devon, moved into an ornamental pond in an agricultural college where beavers had been, the big otter moved in and the beavers moved out. So it just depends. It depends on circumstances, and the size of the individuals involved.
And somebody comments, very excited about this as a Cairngorms resident, wishing the project much success and looking forward to the environmental benefits this will bring. What with the significant deer population increase here in the last 3 years, are there any plans to propose a trial reintroduction of wolves in the future?
That's a really interesting question, but that is way beyond my remit.
Great. So are there any visitor centres or anywhere we could go and get a beaver stick in the future? They sound delightful.
Yes. So again, we would say the Lily Loch, and in the winter time, there usually is sort of some sticks that are washed up. But if you really, really, really want a beaver stick, if you just get in touch with me at the National Park Authority, I'm probably not going to post it to you, but there would be one available if you're desperate to have one. I'm sure we could accommodate that.
Great. Someone says, I've heard that Britain has some of the worst protections for wildlife in Europe, and there has been a lot of shooting of beavers in some areas of Scotland. Are you doing anything to prevent this in the Cairngorms?
That's a really, really good question. Certainly, historically, we feel that that's the case. That has been the case. We suspect there has been illegal shooting of beavers. There also has been culling of beavers under license, which has taken place. But moving forward, we really want to move away at the national level. We're moving away from culling, and it's more trapping and translocation that certainly NatureScot is trying to promote. Within the Cairngorms, within the Strathspey release that's taken forward, we've certainly, because we're working so closely with all of the different stakeholders, we would be really disappointed if it ever did come to that a beaver had been illegally shot. But we really hope that that's not going to be the case, because some of the culling that's gone has been out of, I think, maybe frustration from some individuals. And what we want to do is, by making sure there's a dialogue between people, and also that we are at the end of the telephone, if there's an issue, phone us up and we will come and deal with it. We really feel that that is going to be the way to go and deal with that particular issue. So if someone's having an unacceptable impact upon their land, then we will come and help to deal with that. And we won't just let it just go. And I think that's the key thing to kind of move away from the culling side of things.
Yeah. And how can volunteers help?
Well, so if you're, we don't really encourage people to go looking for beavers at the moment, because there's quite a limited number of them. But again, in the next sort of 2, 3, 4 years, there's going to be the opportunity. Obviously, beavers are going to be more widespread. And in that case, I would recommend people using the Mammal Mapper app. So this is developed by the Mammal Society, and it's an excellent app. And you just go onto the beaver page and you can go and record beaver signs. And that's something that's going to be very useful in the future going ahead. And again, because beavers are widespread all over, certainly central Scotland, sort of lowland Highlands, or around about Perthshire, and then going down towards central Scotland. If you live near a river or a watercourse, you can go and start recording the beaver signs there, and that would be something that would be really, really useful.
And do you pit tag the beavers before release so that individuals which die can be identified?
Yes, that's a great question. So as a stipulation of the license is they all have to be pit tagged. And so that means that when you get the cadaver, you'll be able to identify if it was one of the released animals or if it was actually one that was wild born, because obviously the kits that have been born this year and they won't have pit tags. But that was one of the stipulations of the license, yes.
And someone's asking, is it possible to see the videos you referred to? I realise we're coming up close to time, so I imagine there's probably not time now, but is there maybe some other way that people would be able to see those videos?
Yes, if you follow our social media streams, so if you go onto Facebook or X or Instagram, you'll be able to go and find some of the cute beaver videos. And in the next 3 months, we're going to get 2 of the seasonal rangers going to have a contract extension. We're going to have beaver rangers, and one of their jobs is to go through all of the many, many hours of video that we have, and we're hoping to put more of those videos up on social media. But if you follow our social media feeds, then you'll be able to go and get those videos. Yeah, or have a look at.
And are there plans to reintroduce beavers anywhere else in Scotland? How likely are they to spread from the Spey and Tay catchments to other river catchments?
Well, they will spread. They will spread over time, and it's just really a matter of how fast are they going to do that. So on the East Coast catchments, we suspect that's probably going to be faster because there's more beavers and there's also larger catchments. So you've got more juvenile beavers that are going to do that hopping round about the coast. On the West Coast catchments, that's going to take, I think, an awful lot longer. There's no plans at the moment for other translocations, although I have heard that the Glen Affric translocation of beavers has had to go ahead. So that's hopefully going to take place within this particular release season. But again, some people have complained that we've set the bar a little bit too high for what we've done in terms of going through the consultation. And if there's not an organisation behind it, then it can be perhaps quite off-putting. But I think in the next year, I think we'll see things develop and evolve, and hopefully we'll be able to go and encourage more communities and more areas to go and take forward beaver translocations.
Thank you. So yeah, we're just about coming up for time. There's a load more questions. I wish we had time to answer all of these because there's some really, really interesting questions that have come through. And I just wanted to say, Jonathan, thanks so much for a really, really fascinating, really engaging and very comprehensive talk actually on so many different aspects of this amazing mammal, including everything from their evolution, relationship with humans, their role in the ecosystem, their role in kind of addressing the biodiversity and climate crisis, and then what the National Park Authority and others are doing to bring them back, which I just think is so encouraging. At times when I think we often need quite a bit of encouragement. You know, beavers, I think, are just a real kind of flagship for that, aren't they? So it's just fantastic to hear everything you're doing. So yeah, so thanks so much for taking the time for this webinar. And I wanted to say thanks to everyone for attending as well and for all of your questions. I've certainly found it really interesting and inspiring and educational. So thank you, Jonathan, and thanks everyone for showing up tonight.
Thank you very much.